sending information so that other participants who for some reason was not able to participate in this webinar, so you could provide these materials to them. So I would like now to give floor to Fatima Zahra Taibi. She is the global manager of the project CBIT-GSP, so that she makes some welcoming remarks.
Thank you very much, Naila, for the introduction. Dear colleagues, good morning and good afternoon. I think it might be afternoon for most of you. My name, as Naila has mentioned, is Fatima Zahra Taibi, and I'm the Global Coordinator of the Capacity Building Initiative, the Global Support Program, in short, CBIT-GSP. So the CBIT-GSP is a global project funded by GEF, implemented by UNEP, and executed by the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center. The project aims at supporting developing countries in their transition towards the BTR through various means, such as in-country support and trainings, etc. So on behalf of the CBIT-GSP project and the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this workshop on the NDC track and training aimed at the two networks, as Naila has mentioned, Central Asia and the Caucasus, for which she is the coordinator, and Eurasia, that we are hoping to have a coordinator on board very soon. This is the first time we meet our colleagues from Eurasia, so welcome to this activity, and we look forward to more engagement with you. I would like first and foremost to thank our host, the government of Kazakhstan, and the partner for this workshop, CAREC, for a good collaboration and the support extended to the participants, especially with their visa process. As you know, NDC tracking is one of the main requirements of the NPGs. In fact, for developing countries, it is the only compulsory element for reporting, as reporting on support and adaptation, though very important, especially for developing countries, are not mandatory. That is why it is critical that countries are equipped with the necessary knowledge, skills, and tools to be able to carry this important task. Through this training, we aim to help achieve that. So this training will be hands-on and will require your active involvement and participation throughout the process from now until after the training. We look forward to some good interactions and engagements during this introductory webinar and during all the stages of the training that I will introduce shortly. So thank you again for taking the time to participate in this webinar and taking also the time to come to the workshop later this month. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fatima Zahra, for your kind words and welcome remarks, for a short presentation, for short introductory words about our project, the gist of our project. I want to ask the speakers, please speak slowly so that our interpreters could catch up. I wanted to remind you that the partner or the sole organizer of this particular event, the event which will be held in Almaty soon, it was also possible thanks to support from our regional project, which is located in Central Asian countries, namely creation of Central Asian Hub for ensuring transparency of climate-related actions. We will call it RECAP project. This project is implemented by the Regional Environmental Foundation in Central Asia. I would like to give floor for welcoming remarks on behalf of the RECAP project to Oksana Kravtsova. Oksana, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Naila. Good afternoon, good morning, dear participants, dear organizers. I will not speak too long. I just want to say that I'm very happy to join this important event. Thank you for allocating time, finding time for participation in this important event. As Naila and Fatima mentioned, it's one of the first but very important steps toward preparation to preparing reports and mitigation, NDC mitigation commitments under the Paris Agreement. We all understand that these are global commitments, not just one country or two countries commitments, but it's global, our common commitments. So we all must be well prepared. And we are planning in the nearest future, 25th, 27th of July, the training in Almaty. That will be not just training, but very large work, practical work, hands-on work on the use of different tools and instruments, etc. And also we will organize webinars which where we will invite the best experts from the world. So I want to thank GEF, UNEP, other organizations for your support, for your kind support. And I want to wish you good and fruitful and interesting work today. Thank you. Thank you, Oksana. So before we go to the contents of today's webinar, I would like to ask all participants, please switch on your cameras, smile, wave to each other so that we see that like real faces of real people. And we will use a print screen in order to make this the photos of our faces, and then we will send all this to you. I am still waiting for a few more people. Please switch on your cameras. Great. Smile. One more minute, please. Stay with me. So a few more people are switching on their cameras. And 30 more seconds. So smile, everybody. Thank you very much. You can now switch off your camera if you want, or you can leave it on. So I again thank you. And of course, we will now start our webinar according to the agenda. Now I'd like to give floor to Fatima Zahra Taibi so that she gives us the general overview of the concept, what we are waiting within this whole training process devoted to NDC mitigation commitments. So Fatima Zahra, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Naila. Just trying to share my screen. Are you able to see my screen? Yeah, good. Yeah, so thank you, Naila. So I will just very quickly go with you through our program for this workshop. So basically, as it has been already mentioned, the workshop is co-organized by the Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency, the Global Support Program, which is the CBIT-GSP, and the Central Asian Hub, CAREC, and it's hosted by the government of Kazakhstan. So the main objective basically of this workshop is to support the countries in the technical understanding of the reporting for NDC mitigation commitments and all associated requirements. So the idea is to provide the national mitigation teams with useful information and experiences to facilitate their reporting, including preparing for the use of the common tabular format, seeing how the use of the modeling tools for determining scenarios and projections can be helpful and can be used for tracking NDCs, and also the use of select NDC tracking tools. So also we are aiming to with this workshop or with this full package of activities related to this workshop, that the country teams get a kickstart in tracking NDCs through the use of real country data and the own information from their own NDCs. We also would like that the workshop constitutes a forum for exchange of experiences and lessons learned corresponding to the applications of the various tools and also the experiences in the tracking and reporting of mitigation actions and reporting, and also discussing and identifying the common challenges and opportunities for collaborations among country teams on this subject. So the workshop has various objectives that all go towards helping or supporting countries really getting started with the tracking of the NDCs, because as we have mentioned before, this is one of the main areas of the MPGs, and that's kind of like really the most the compulsory part of the MPGs for reporting for developing countries. So it's new for everyone. So it's really important that we get knowledge and some good experiences on how to report and how to use the different tools and go through the various reporting tables. So our approach for this activity, basically, as you can see, we have now this introductory webinar. Then we will have a second stage where we will be collecting information from countries. You will be collecting your own information based on templates that we will be providing. And then we will have the in-person events and then a follow-up afterwards for those countries who wish to follow up on NDC tracking with us in some of the sectors, on some of the areas. So basically for this introductory webinars, the aim is really to introduce the training and the main concepts and the provisions of NDC tracking and give guidance to you for the preparation of the next stages with regard to looking for what are the data that are needed, and also just having an introduction with regard to the reporting requirements of the ETF. Also introduction on the mitigation tracking in the context of UNFCCC, and some practical cases on NDC tracking, so that you can have an idea on how it would look like once you start tracking your NDC, and then some guidance in the following stages. So the data needs for the stages 2 and 3 of the workshop, and presentations of the templates that need to be filled from your side before you come to the workshop in Almaty. Then we have the stage of the in-country data collection, and here the objective is basically to gather all the necessary data that we would need to use during the training, because we think that it would be much more useful if you are using data from your own country, so that gets you started with the tracking of NDC, and also make you realize whether you are missing some data, what kind of tool you might be needing to use in order to be able to fill the tables and so on. So this is really a very critical stage in the process. Then comes the in-person training, and here it's really to equip you with the knowledge and the necessary tools that you would need for tracking the mitigation components of your NDCs with using your own data. And here we will have 3 days workshop. The first day will be concentrated on the MPGs and mitigation assessments, but we will already start with filling in some of the tables. So the tables from 1 to 4, the common reporting tables. And then we have in day 2, we will look into tracking of mitigation actions, and then tables from 5 to 10, and the use of modeling tools for the tracking of NDCs. And then in day 3, we will look into the data needs, the useful tools for tracking NDCs. Here we will be looking more specifically into the FAO, the new FAO tracking tool. And then we will discuss the way forward for the different countries on how to progress with the NDC tracking afterwards. And then for the follow-up, it's basically the consolidation of the learning from the events and the opportunity to progress with the tracking of your NDCs that you have started during the workshop. So this is a voluntary stage. So it would be good if some of you would like to follow up with us, so we can provide you with the support that you would need for the tracking of your NDCs and get you started and progress in that process. And we can work with you on some pilot cases from the project side. So that's basically the 4 stages that we have for this activity. And I hope that this will be really useful for you, and you will find that it would help you progress with your work and in the preparation of your BTR. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fatima Zahra, for your great presentation, for very brief but very clearly written presentation explaining the future training and the exercise, which will actually cover all stages of interaction with all our participants from all these countries. I hope, dear participants, that everything is now clear. If something is not clear, please raise your hand or write your questions in the chat. So we will continue. Any questions, comments, or something, clarifications? Yes, Burhan. Question, please switch on your microphone and ask your question.
Thank you. And first of all, and greetings to all the distinguished stakeholders. Actually, I have 2 more questions and a few one. First one, and which software programs we will use during the workshop and the LEAP and another program. And second, the question, and Mrs. has mentioned there, and we have to gather the collections of data. And which kind of the data we have to gather, because, and you know, sometimes we face the problem because, and it gives us some gaps and the missing the data, and which years we need. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Orhan, for the question. So basically, for the tools, as this workshop, it's only 3 days, and we want to concentrate mainly on the tables. We will not have time to go very in details in modeling tools and provide the training on that, because each modeling tool would require at least 3 days on its own. But we will give you examples from the use of the GASMO and the LEAP tools to do the projections and mitigation assessment. Then we will be going actually quite into some details on the FAO tool, the new tracking tool of the FAO. But that's basically for reporting the NDC. So the tool does not do calculations or projections and so on, but it would help organize the data and also track the progress. But you would need to input the data there manually for the tool to make the graphs and give you a sense of progress. So that's basically the main tools that we will be using during the workshop. And we will be mainly using the tables of UNFCCC, the common reporting tables. because they would be also like the basis for the new reporting tool that the UNFCCC is working on. Unfortunately, the tool is not ready for this workshop, but we are trying to collaborate with UNFCCC to cover it in future workshops so that countries have demonstration of the new reporting tool. But unfortunately, it's not ready right now, so we are not able to have it for this workshop. And then and then we have, I see just another question with regard to, sorry, what was the second question? It was about...
Sorry, so my questions are regarding data collection.
The data collection, sorry. Yeah, for the data collection, I think I would ask for your patience until the last presentation, where my colleagues will be presenting the tables that needs to be filled. Of course, you just collect the data that you have. We are aware that many countries are missing a lot of the data that are needed for tracking of NDCs, but this could be nevertheless a helpful exercise. So that you know what you are missing and you know what you would be needing for the tracking of the NDCs. So my colleagues will be showing in detail what are the data that are needed, and we will be sharing with you the templates at the end of this webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fatima Zahra. And from my side, the information for all the participants. Immediately after the webinar, we'll send the link to our platform on transparency, where you will be able to download all the materials, presentations, and the recording of today's webinar. As soon as we'll finalize it, we'll finish it. So you will have the link to all the presentations. So we continue. The next participant or the next speaker is Yali Wang. She represents the Secretariat of the Framework Convention of UN on Climate Change, and she'll briefly remind us the requirements to manage reporting according to the ETF. And she will share the information focusing on mandatory requirements of reporting on tracking on NUF. Yalisa, the floor is yours. So can you please speak a bit slowly so that our interpreters will have time to interpret into Russian? Thank you. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Can you see my screen? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. And thank you, Fatima Zahra, for inviting me to this webinar. I am Yani Wang. I work for the UNFCCC Secretariat, and I support developing countries in transparency reporting. My presentation today aims to introduce very briefly ETF reporting requirements with a focus on reporting information to track progress of NDCs. And can you see my, Article 13 of the Paris Agreement established an enhanced transparency framework for action and support in order to build mutual trust and confidence among parties and to promote the effective implementation of the Paris Agreement, which built in flexibility, which takes into account parties' different capacities and builds upon the collective experience. So the purpose of transparency for action is to provide a clear understanding of climate action, including clarity and tracking of progress towards NDCs and adaptation actions. And the purpose of transparency for support is to provide clarity on support provided and received by individual parties in the context of climate change actions, and also to provide a full overview of aggregate financial support provided. This information will be fed into global stocktake eventually, which is a mechanism on determining collective progress towards achieving the purpose of long-term goals of the Paris Agreement. The cost structure of the ETF includes reporting, technical expert review, and facilitative multilateral consideration of progress, as you can see from this table, through the detailed guidance on the reporting, review, and consideration process for the information to be submitted and making those reports public available. The ETF will make it possible to track the progress made by each country. In this way, it will be possible to compare a country's actions against its plans and ambitions as described in its NDCs. To ensure that this exercise is as robust and accurate as possible, the parties agreed to the common tabular formats for tracking progress towards NDC, among other tables, outlines, and formats for ETF reporting agreed in 2021 Glasgow. The ETF builds on and enhances the existing MRV arrangements under the Convention. Broadly speaking, the main areas of enhancements are: under the ETF, all parties will use the same set of modalities, procedures, and guidelines with flexibility to those developing countries that need it in the light of their capacity. To the extent possible, parties need to identify, regularly update, and report on areas of improvement. And also, most of the provisions and requirements are mandatory, means it's shall. And also inability to fulfill certain provisions under the reporting, the TER and FMCP can promote the mechanism to facilitate the implementation of and promote compliance to initiate consideration of the issue. And as mentioned, MPGs for ETF specify the flexibility provisions for those developing countries' parties that need it in the light of their capacities. So this is also applies to reporting information to track progress of the MDCs. And from this table, you can see the MDC-related flexibility provisions. And also for more information, please see our updated ETF handbook, which is just released this year. And nevertheless, since the MPGs for the ETF were guided by the principle of building on and enhancing the transparency arrangements under the Convention, so it is no surprise that several reporting and review requirements under the ETF are similar and or consistent with those of the current MRV arrangements under the Convention. As you can see, the national communications will continue to be submitted, but the BTRs will replace the BURs. Several of the items you report on will be similar, but the legal nature differs. And also the BTR will include information on progress towards NDCs as well as adaptation actions. The transaction from MRV to ETF is ongoing. So parties will submit their first BTRs latest by 31st December 2024. However, LDCs and SEEDs may submit the first BTRs at their discretion. Here is the outline of the BTR. You can see that Chapter 2 is information necessary to track progress of the NDCs. And more specifically, the reporting components include A, national circumstances and institutional arrangements. B. Description of a party's NDC, including updates. C. Information necessary to track progress made in implementing and achieving NDCs. D. Mitigation policies and measures, actions and plans, including those with mitigation co-benefits resulting from adaptation actions and economic diversification plans related to implementing and achieving an NDC. F. Summary of greenhouse gas emissions and removals. F. Projections of greenhouse gas emissions and removals as applicable. And G, as some other information. So we have several guideline materials on MRV and ETF. Please scan the code or visit the link to visit UNFCCC and the CGE web pages. I also included in the PowerPoint more information on the reporting components just mentioned. So I will showcase those slides, but I won't go into details as I know that this training program will provide more information. And the PowerPoint has been shared with UNFCCC, so you will have all the information. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Yale, for the wonderful presentation and that you helped our participants to listen to the information about the requirements to the report. And distinguished participants, do you have any questions to Yale? If you have any questions, please raise your hand, or maybe you have some clarifications. Not as for now. However, in the chat, you can see I have sent you the updated link for the guidelines on the expanded framework on transparency, both in Russian and English. If before it was available in English, now it's available in Russian. Please click the links and check it. That's for your information. This updated information is available and you can study it and use it in your work. Yes, of course, we'll try to send by email and you will have an access to all the materials, including the YALA presentation on the main requirements on report. And thank you very much, our speaker. The next speaker is Fernando Fares from Copenhagen Climate Center UNEP, who will present the main information on tracking the mitigation actions in the framework of the UN Convention, and he will cover the data collection information. He will present the templates of the UN Framework Convention and discuss the existing tools to prepare the Biennial Transparency Reports, BTR. And also he will discuss the tracking of the progress of NOV, including the information on indicators and the projections of the greenhouse gases emissions. Fernando, also the floor is yours, the virtual microphone, the floor is yours for your speech, for your presentation.
Thank you, Nailia. I will proceed to share my screen. So you can have access to my PowerPoint presentation that I hope you are now, can you see it? Okay, perfect. I'll try not to speak too fast also, but good afternoon for you here in Denmark. We are looking forward to meeting you in person in Almaty. Today I will give two short presentations And the first one is more related with the technical elements, whereas the second one at the end of the webinar will be related to more practical implementation, and the activities will perform in Almaty as a part of this in-person webinar. The aim of this introductory presentation is to explain to you a bit why it's important a proper tracking of mitigation of emissions. Actually, we want answers to the question of how much progress the country has made towards achieving its national determined contribution, or NDC in English, and the targets that are included in the national determined contribution. To follow the guidance under the modalities, procedures, and guidance, or the MPGs, countries need to provide a series of information related with the targets included into the NDC. And with this data, we will be able to track the evolution of these targets. We can consider that countries can have a global target covering the whole range of emissions, or specific mitigation policies, measures, actions, and plans. If the case is related with a target at the national level, probably the best tool to assess if the country is in line with the reductions proposed can be found on the national GHG inventory. But if we are talking on policies, measures, actions, and plans, or we can think on bottom-up activities, then we can have a look at the BTR mitigation chapter results. When countries present their BTRs, it will be not only a matter of filling tables, but also a matter of having a document where the different actions or measures that the countries are planning to do, or they are conducting in mitigation terms, will be included. The approach in each case is rather different if we are thinking of a global target, or if we are thinking of a policy or measure or action to reduce mitigation emissions. On one hand, to track properly mitigation actions, policies, and measures, we need an assessment of what are the type of reductions in GHG emissions that have been achieved. I mean, this is the numerical, is not only explaining what has been done in terms of implementing the action of the policy, but also it is very important to include what is the level of GHG emissions that are reduced by the particular action at some point in time. But if we are tracking progress of NDC targets, like a global targets, then we will need the national GHG inventory of the country to make the proper comparison. What we need then is to identify what is called progress indicators to compare with other emission targets. As a source of climate indicators, last year, the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations published this compendium of climate indicators that I think is a good tool to identify different indicators for reporting. What is important is that not only we have more than 150 indicators in the area of emissions, concentration, mitigation, vulnerability and adaptation, but also provides a sort of, I would say, indicators that can be followed on time if they are properly defined and everybody understands the same. Out of these more than 150 climate indicators, we have, in particular, I wanted to highlight the case of the greenhouse gas emissions indicators, and they present a total of 8 greenhouse gas emissions. Not all countries use all of them. Actually, I don't know any country that uses all of them, but they can use 1 or 2 or 3 depending on their own NDC and depending on their own availability of data to make a good characterization of how the emissions of greenhouse gases are being mitigated in the country. Something similar we can do regarding indicators to report progress on implementation of mitigation policies, actions, measures, and plans. But in these cases, the indicators are rather different. We are not talking just of GHG emissions, but depending on the policy or the action, we will need information such as amount of electricity generation, what is, if it's a transit policy, what are the number of vehicles that are introduced in the country with certain technologies, or the tons of gases, or area of forest that is afforested, for instance. No, so in the case of policies, actions, measures, and plans, we have a range of indicators, and we are not only abide to present GHG emissions, but also indicators that can make more sense for the implementation of the activities. And then once we have the indicator, it comes the issue of the reporting them. And following the MPGs, the modalities, procedures, and guidelines agreed under the Article 13 of the Paris Agreement, there is already a number of what is called common tabular formats, or CTF, that are that will be used by countries to reporting the information on tracking mitigation. This currently is part of an annex into the decision 5/CMA3, and it covers a number of information that must be provided by countries. It includes a total number of 13 tables and 1 appendix that must be filled by countries as a part of the preparation of their Biennial Transparency Reports, or BTRs. these 13 tables covers the 7 parts or 7 elements included under the MPGs, in particular, section 3, which is the one related with the progress in identifying the progress of implementing and achieving the national determined contribution. Just to start closing on this part of my first presentation on more general topics, I just wanted to share with you a number of publications that are already being published by different organizations working on transparency currently, and that I think that may be useful for the teams that will be in charge of presenting the part of the tracking, the mitigation action of the NDC, and this can be a source of good information. Thank you for your attention, and we are open to questions on this first part of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Fernando, for a very great presentation, for clear description of the reporting based on which the entire work will be built. The cooperation between our countries will be based on. Dear participants, now you have an opportunity to ask questions to Fernando. So, like any question, maybe clarification, any questions related to technical details. Dear colleagues, everything is clear? No questions? Ask questions in any, well, not any language, but Russian or English. All right, in the chat. Hands, raised hands. If you need more time in order to digest all the information provided, ask questions later. In the chat, sometimes it takes time in order to properly formulate the question. I'm sure that you have a lot of questions, but in order to properly word the questions, you need time. Please don't be shy. Ask your questions in the chat. We'll come back to each question. So if you don't mind, we will move according to our agenda. Will be made, it's called practical case on NDC tracking. And I would like to give the virtual microphone to Aymgul, who will provide this practical case, practical experience. As I understood, Aymgul, you will speak in Russian, right? Aymgul, the floor is yours. And dear colleagues, please be active. Don't be shy. Please send your questions through chat. And raise your hand anytime if you need any question or you need any, ask your questions. Aymgul, please. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Thank you very much for invitation. I will present the practical case of filling the tables, common table, tabular formats, or CTF as we call them, using Mauritius as an example. So here you see 12 tables in Excel format, in Excel file, with field data using a concrete country as an example. So the first table, table 1, is a general description of certain selected indicators within NDC. So using this case, you could see that this country is using just one major indicator. It's called total GHG emissions within the total economy sectors. You could see that historical data for the starting point for collection of data for NDC was 2016. That's the last day of the inventory. And the total emissions were 4,881 GHG equivalent. You could also see the emissions of this country for business as usual, or baseline level 2030, and the reference level 6,900 kilotons of CO2 equivalent. So the next line is about updates, any updates in accordance with any recalculation of the inventory. So this country didn't perform any recalculation. So that's why they mentioned that no recalculation conducted. And the next one, the next line is relation to NDC, and the indicator directly relates to the NDC target. So the first small table is actually a brief description of the major indicator in this case, total emissions, GHG emissions in the economy of the country. So the starting point, initial or historical point, the reference level, and the baseline, business as usual level. Table 2 is the definitions which are needed to understand NDC. So here we see the description first. Again, the emission, the indicator, reduction of overall greenhouse gas emissions by 40% in 2030 compared to the business as usual scenario. And this indicator includes emissions from the particular sector, sectors, and also in these tables, you must provide description of which sectors were included, which were excluded from calculations, or which were excluded from NDC. For example, here in Mauritius, we see that that PFCs, CF6 emissions were excluded. So all sectors were included. So also here you need to provide definitions in order to understand mitigation benefits of adaptation actions and or economic diversification plans. And here Mauritius provided some additional benefits for mitigation. So this is the example of table 2. Let's go to table 3. Table is about methodologies and accounting approaches during tracking NDC and preparation of reporting. For example, here they mentioned that whether they used IPCC methodology or some other methodologies during preparation of the baseline scenario, of the forecasted scenario for tracking the progress made. what kind of methodologies they used, what were the main drivers or assumptions used for assessing the baseline level, the current actual level, also global warming potential data used. What was the coefficient, which coefficient was used in order to assess the emissions. A lot of information in this table, which must be provided in order to show which methodologies they used in order to track progress. Also, they provide, like, all categories were included, or maybe certain categories or sectors were excluded. Also, information is provided about modeling approaches. For example, they use the LEAP model and some other models. Table 4. Here they provide information for tracking progress made in implementing and achieving the NDC. So they must provide information for selected indicators. For example, for this particular country, that was total greenhouse gas emissions in the entire economy. So it's just one line. But if your country will have several indicators for NDC, then you can add more lines and provide more detailed information about several indicators. Emissions in the entire country, and information I could see here is the baseline or reference, called reference point, and that's the emission of Mauritius by 2030 using business as usual model, 6.9 million tons of CO2 equivalent. So in this cell, you could see these numbers. And the next columns are information about the years and implementation period of NDC with breakdown by years. So, for example, the year 2021 is empty. The cell is empty because we currently don't have information about 2021.
Here we'll have the data on 2021, and then we'll have an opportunity to assess the progress to implement NDCs. So the planned level, the target level. Or the target level is 14,040 tons, so which is 40% of the reduction compared to business as usual scenario. So the main principle of this table is to compare both the historical emissions when we have data with this level, the planned level of NDCs. So 1414 decrease for 40%. So since we don't have data in 2021, we couldn't assess the progress towards the planned target level, 14.14 CO2 equivalent. So further on, we can see the information with the LUCF sector is included in NDC, and here we have the data on the basic line or reference level of the business as usual scenario in 2023. So then this table has the information whether the country plans to participate in the priority zone cooperation or use the international transfer to mitigation outcomes. So briefly, we call it ITMO. So Mavrikia didn't provide the information here on applying the international cooperation approaches. So therefore, these columns are empty. So below on this table, you can see the final results comparison of the plant level of NDC. The actual data, historical data, since NDC period is not yet finished, so we can't assess whether NDC was achieved. Therefore, we have wrote here that it will be filled in as soon as the period of NDC will be finished. So table number 5 is the policies and measures to mitigation policies and measures. So here we have the main policy and measures to achieve NDC. For example, in Mavrikia, here we have had some examples of these policies and measures guidelines. This example shows the policy and the strategy on transition to a low carbon economy in Mavrikia. What measures are planned in this strategy, or what type of tools, the regulatory tool, the political, the others. For example, now this is in the process of implementation. What kind of gases have been included? Which ones will be subjected to change after implementing the strategy? Which gases will be reduced as soon as the strategy will be implemented? CO2, CO4, and 2O. So what government body is responsible for the implementation of this strategy? For example, Ministry of Finance, the government Mavrikia. As was mentioned by Fernanda, here we have the information about the assessment scope of the greenhouse gas emissions mitigation in CO2 equivalent. And here in Mavrikia, we have assessed the consequences of this policy. So what will be the volume of emissions of the greenhouse gases in the framework of this policy? Here we have several examples of policies in Mavrikia to reduce the greenhouse gases emission. And for some policies, there is assessment of the mitigation of emissions, but in others, no. So speaking about table 7 is the forecast of the greenhouse gas emissions scenario together with the measures. As was mentioned earlier, the 4 projections of the emissions together with the measures is the mandatory requirement in the framework of the reporting, and table 6 and table 8 is a voluntary requirement. This is the requirement which, based on which the country can provide the information, but as I said, it's not the mandatory requirement. So here the forecasts on the emissions provided by sectors, by gas, type of gases, and the information about the historical level of emissions is provided. For instance, in Mavrikia, we can see the last inventory was done in 2016. So accordingly, here we have the data by sectors for 2016 and the projections of the greenhouse gas emissions with scenarios and measures for 2013. In NDC, we haven't data for 2025-2030, so therefore these columns are empty. But as soon as we have this information, we need to fill in all the columns, including 25, 30, 35, and for the historical period till 2035. Also, the information is provided about the total emissions, including LULUCF and excluding LULUCF, land use change, and forestry. And this is the general information about the greenhouse gas emissions and the national inventory list. So Table 8 is the projection of greenhouse gas emissions and the additional measures. So here we can include the measures which are planned. If, for example, scenario with the measures, here we include the measures which are adopted, but in scenario with additional measures, here the respective models, the planned measures can be included. As I said, Table 8 is not mandatory one. Country can provide this information, but is not obliged to provide this information. Here we have the emissions by sectors, by type of gases, and the historical period, the projected period. Table 9 are the projections without measures. So this is the theoretical scenario, and it is suggested that the country will not take the measures to reduce the greenhouse gases in the projected period. And here we have to be careful to understand what kind of measures have been included in scenario together with the measures, and what are the additional ones together with additional measures, and to be attentive when preparing the scenario without measures. It's also a voluntary table, so without measures. In NDC, in Mavriky, there was information provided on forecasted projected emissions for 2020, so you can see the data for 2030 and the total emissions, including LULUCF and excluding LULUCF. Table 10 is the forecast of the main indicators. So the ones which have been described in Table 1, Table 2. So here we have the projected indicators for 2025, 2030, 35. And in this scenario, the NDC's projections provide for 2030. And since the indicators provided are the emissions countrywide for each sector. So in this table, these are the projected emissions for 2030. Since given the example of Mavriky, scenarios and measures are compliant with the target NDC, target policy. So the value is the same as in the scenario with the measures. However, it can vary depending on the country. If country plans to use the international transport mitigation outcome, then the scenario with the measures will be different from NDCs. But in this case, we don't have information about the use of international transport mitigation outcomes. So NDC was compliant with the scenarios, including measures. So here we have one indicator for NDC, which is the general outcome emissions. This one indicator, if country has several indicators, then the lines can be added additionally. Table 11 are the assumptions and parameters used for the projections. So unfortunately, here in Mavriky, in terms of the NDCs, we couldn't have data about the main assumptions and parameters. So this table is empty, as you can see. However, in other countries, perhaps this information is available and the data can be filled in here. So what do we mean here? When preparing the projections on emissions, we apply the drivers or some assumptions. For example, it can be the projections of the GDP, it can be the projections of the number of cars, number of population, number of households, or output of the industry products, so which was used for the respective projection model as the input. And for the transparency, the countries have to provide the main assumptions and drivers which have been used when preparing the model or the projections of emissions of greenhouse gases or any other indicators in the framework of NDCs. Here we have the indicators provided for historical values. If indicator is the emissions of greenhouse gases countrywide, so the historical values have to be provided for the emissions of the gases countrywide, as well the projected ones. We should bear in mind that the information shall be provided with the 5 years step. So here you can see 30, 35, 25. So a step into 5 years until the end of NDC period. In other words, till 2030, the forecasts have to be, projections have to be provided. Or for 15 years, starting with the recent years of inventory stock take. So the historical period 2016 plus 15 years, so 2031, since we have 5 years plan. So in example with Mauritius, it will be 2035, so that the period where the projected indicators shall be received. So table 12, this is the information necessary to track and implement the policies and measures related to the socio-economic outcomes, measures to mitigate, for mitigation. Here in NDC Mavriki, there was no information, and accordingly this table left empty. So we have finalized with table 12. That's the common report in common tabular format. So CTF acronym. So if you have any questions, I'm ready to answer. Thank you very much. I'm good for the wonderful presentation, for detailed presentation of all tables and information, which shall be in country reporting. So distinguished colleagues, please, if you have any questions, because the topic is quite specific, quite technical, if you have any questions on the tables and the information which shall be presented, please, the floor is yours. And the first floor I would like to give to Orhan and then Tirsu Mihai. Orhan, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for giving us more information. It's really specific and interesting. I'm just curious, and my questions are regarding the table 1. So, and you have mentioned the starting point in 2016 and compared business as usual. Will you give a little bit some more information about it? What does it mean? And my second question is regarding table 7. And we saw that GHG emission by each sector and has been calculated in 2016. And upon that, we saw that in 2025. And still the 9 years, and we saw the gap available there. How we can prove and we can give the evidence, okay, now we successfully achieved, for example, an 8,000 kilotons and we decreased. Because already, and we didn't see any information within the 9 years. Please, will you explain this? Thank you. Just on the notes. Okay. One year just only? Yeah. Yes. So, okay, please go ahead. Mm-hmm. Okay, now I mean, the last years in 2016, and you are taking the previous years, like the 1990, 2010. You are
Вот вы говорите,
related
что можно
back on
взять
that,
другой
and
исторический какой-то год,
the
допустим,
project is for the future, right?
1999 год, и затем показать прогнозный какой-то год, допустим, 2030 год. То есть здесь в данном конкретном случае это не аккумуляция за несколько лет, а это только данные за 2016 год. То есть это не за период, там, допустим, с 10 по 16, а только за 2016 год. Ну, по крайней мере, они так решили в своей табличке, так показать данные за 2016 год и затем прогнозируемый уровень к 2025 или 2030 году. Еще раз повторюсь, что это называются общие таблицы. Они собираются, эти данные в таблице, именно для цели сбора данных по странам и затем для сравнения. Поэтому, в общем-то, страна сама может решать, как, за какой период показать эти данные. Thank you very much for your question. So Mihai first and then Katya. Actually, it was a very interesting presentation, very clear understanding now. But you mentioned that, for example, business as usual scenario, and in one table, and in some with measures. So could you explain business as usual and without measures means the same for me? Could you clarify a little bit? Thank you very much for your question. Indeed, we have such definition. For example, when we say business as usual, it means, it doesn't mean that it's without measures, without implemented measures. Here, in concrete case, this is not without measures, it means usual, but you should be attentive and remember that when it means that we are excluding all measures from the historical point, which means that in all years, forecast years, we are looking at the hypothetical scenarios where we assume that starting from a certain period, so in this particular case, in Mauritius, it's the same thing, but not always the same. Another question, maybe you know, maybe not. Any country in the world, they reached BTR, any success stories of BTR, any ready BTR we could look at. Oh no. I saw examples of field, not official reports, which Fernando mentioned. There were examples of field forms. It's mostly for training purpose. I haven't seen, but it's interesting that recently I saw the national report from Tunisia, and they provided information for certain tables of general reporting. Thank you. Thank you, Mihai, for your interesting questions. Information, maybe Fernando and Fatima Zahra will confirm. During training in Almaty, we will give you some templates which will be filled, and they will be like examples for you, filled by certain countries, so that you could see practically how to fill, what to put in the tables, take into account our country specifics.
Yeah, basically the tables that we have currently that MGUL has presented are the tables that need to be included in the BTR. So once a BTR need to be like once countries are ready to prepare their BTRs, they would need to use these tables that she has mentioned. And it's through these tables that we will go throughout the workshop. So as I have mentioned before in the presentation, we will try to go through tables from 1 to 12. Many of you, for many of you, 12 is not very relevant, but for some of you it is. So the idea is really to try to go through it and do exercises, whether with your own data, if you have collected enough data to bring to the workshop. That's why it's quite an important stage in the process. Or if that is not the case, then we can use some theoretical data to fill the tables, but that would give you a good idea on what you need, and then the calculations that needs to be made, and so on. And then afterwards, for those who would like to follow up, then we would be able to support you in that process as well.
And in addition to what Fatima mentioned, just to tell you that we have tracked a number of countries that are already starting to fill some tables, and we will show you examples, real examples by countries that are starting to show how the tables look like, and then we can compare with the information you will bring, and we can have some practical exercises mixing both what countries are presenting and what your information from your countries is available. So I'm looking forward to that sessions.
Thank you very much, Fatima and Fernando, for clarification. And now we have one more question from Katia Simenov. Thank you very much for very useful and additional information, which I think will be necessary for all our countries for better understanding of what should be included, what parameters to account. Thank you for your advice. Dear colleagues, let's move according to our agenda. We have one final presentation, which will be made by Fernando. He will speak about instructions for the next stages and about homework which you will have to do in order to prepare for the following stages, number 2 and 3 of the workshop. So preparation of data and also in-person or physical exercise, face-to-face exercise, which we will have in Almaty. Fernando, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nailia. I will proceed to share my screen. Just to present you this final presentation. The idea of this training will be to conduct some practical exercises in Almaty, and so you can get familiar with the feeling the CTF tables. We understand that it's a complex, daunting exercise. At the beginning, when we were in front of the 13 tables, and we need to fill everything, and information is not in our hands. We created for you some simple templates to fill with some of the key data that will be useful for filling some key tables. I mean, we are not trying to fill the whole 13 tables, but to see which tables are more important, which we can have more questions and concentrate on that. For this, we will then, before the event in Almaty, we will circulate with you an Excel file with 3 tabs that are each of these tabs corresponds to tables A, B, and C. And when each country has this information, then in Almaty we will be able to conduct some numerical exercises using GASMO to see what will be the impact of some of the measures according to the information you bring, and we will be able then to fill several of the tables that are part of the CTF. For this, we will have 3 days with presentations and practical exercises prepared for you. But I just wanted to give you a brief idea of what will you find in this Excel file that we will circulate with you. And as I mentioned before, there are 3 tabs into this Excel file, and the first tab is table A, which brings information that mostly refers to the NDC description. So it won't be that difficult to gather this information, since if you have the NDC, the National Determined Contribution, on your hand, you will find how to fill these different elements of this table A. This table A will be particularly useful for filling the first tables of the CTF. Then we'll have a table B. Table B will bring information mostly numerical also on projections of projections in general terms of probably when you had the opportunity to prepare your NDCs and you were able to indicate some values to be complied by 2025 or most of the countries by 2030, there were some projections that were done in each of the countries. So probably if your team conducted these projections, or if this information is available, then you will be able to fill 3 tables, one table with projections of the NDC indicators, a second table with measures scenario that is probably the table that is more relevant of the group of projections tables, and we also will have a look at the assumptions and parameters used for projections, as mentioned before by Katia, that these are also relevant in terms of to know how to conduct this assessment of future projection of emissions. And finally, the table C, we think that it is also important that you can go particularly on table 5, as presented by Engul before, that is the table for country mitigation policies, measures, and actions. So we are asking you if you can bring some information on particular policies that can be assessed by us in Almaty with the information you bring for different actions, policies, and measures in 3 areas. This is just for practical exercise that we are conducting, and we're thinking that many of the countries have information on efficient domestic lining programs that conducting to replace lights, bulb lights. We also think that solar PV is a very popular mitigation measure that countries are conducting, and maybe you can have this information available in your countries that you can bring to us. And we also to not think only in energy sector, but also in transport sector. We included that if your country has some program to introduce electric vehicles, information on that program also can be used for filling one of the rows of table 5. The idea is just to make examples. If you don't have this project, of the information for this project is not available, well, we will use the information of a country that has this information, and you will have it as an example that will be useful once you have this information. And in next year, when you are preparing your own BTR, you can make an application with your country data for this case. But I think that if you can make the effort to bring this information to Almaty and to see what will be the impact of the emissions and compare with other countries and see, for instance, sometimes we have doubts if our mitigation emissions are too low or how are they distributed in time. It's a good thing that if we can compare with what other countries are doing. So the idea, as it was indicated by Fatima, will be try to fill as many as the tables that are included into these 13 tables, we will provide more focus on the tables that are mandatory. But we think that in the 3 days we will hope to cover all the 13 plus the appendix tables, so you can have a clear idea of what is behind these tables under the common tabular formats for the mitigation case. And for this, we created waiting for the UNFCCC official software to fill. We created some Excel files where it is easy for you to input the information, and these Excel files are based on the common tabular formats. So they are basically the same, but instead of having a PDF file like is the current decision, now you will have the opportunity to use an Excel file that is indeed easier to fill by you with the information you have for each of the elements that are part of your NDC. And this the whole presentation by Ngul that she did before, it's an example of how look like the Excel files with the 13 tables plus the appendix that is part of the CTF in the case of a particular country as Mauritius. But we will check and we will see other countries as well as examples of how countries are starting to fill this CTF table. So in summary, what we are doing is using this table A, B, and C that are part of the Excel file that we will circulate to you. We will do some estimations of the likely impact of some of these actions based on real data from countries, and with this we will be able to fill tables 1 to 4 and tables related with projections and also related with policies, measures, actions, and plans. And this graph shows more or less with each table of the Excel file that we will circulate with you, how we will use it in order to fill the different tables. So what we need for you is once we circulate this Excel file with tables A, B, and C, you can send us back a few days before the event, so we can have the weekend to review the information you have for each of the countries and see what can be done in Almaty in terms of filling the tables of the CTF. So with this, I'm closing my presentation.
Thank you very much, Fernando, for the instructions and for detailed description of what is necessary to be done by the participants, including the detailed information about all 3 tables with the data we expect from the countries. And one note for participants who have missed this information: by July 21st, we are waiting the filled-in tables from you so that our team can use the weekends to review your data so that you can use them, to use them in Almaty, so that the training will be practical using the realistic data of the countries. So, distinguished participants, you have an opportunity to ask the questions to Fernando if you have, which of course require better clarity to fill in, to do this exercise to fill in these tables. Please, the floor is yours if you have any questions. So everything is clear. Maybe some comments or additions. I think everything is clear. Maybe during the speech of IMGUL, they have participants have asked the technical questions. Perhaps you have questions when you will fill in the tables. Mihai has question to Fernando whether the tables will be sent to us, which will shall be filled in.
Yeah, we have the Excel file already, so it would be a matter of just channeling through the people to the organizers. So the file, the Excel file is already ready.
Thank you, Fernanda. As you understood, everything is ready and we'll send everything to the participants. So, distinguished colleagues, I have another request. Can you please fill in the brief questionnaire, 2 questions about the effectiveness of our meeting today. It will help us to prepare the materials, maybe for some other questions which will be interesting for you, or to understand whether we move in a right direction. 2 slides over there, 2 questions. They are divided into Russian and English, so you can easily understand what is there and needed from you. And we have time for the final words to finish our webinar. And I would like to give this floor to Fatima Zahra.
Thank you very much, Naila, and thank you to all of you for your active participation in this webinar. So as my colleagues have said, Fernando and Naila, it is really important that you make the effort to collect the data that are needed. So we have basically to do all these tables, we have concentrated all information only into 3 tables so that it's not so overwhelming for you from the get-go. So please do take the time to collect the data and fill these tables with your own information, because that's what would be really useful during the workshop and would get you started with the tracking of your NDC. Also, if you are able to send us this data as soon as possible, that would be really helpful, because then getting the data from 20 countries on the 21st wouldn't be really very easy for us to review. So please, as soon as you have collected the data and it's ready, please do feel free to send it, preferably before the 21st of July. And with that, yeah, please do the Menti, because that's an information that we would need to see how to improve our webinars. And this is just a taste from the workshop and taste the start of this activity. So thank you very much for staying with us, and thank you for your active participation, and see all of you in Almaty in almost just a bit more than 2 weeks. So thank you very much and looking forward.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. See you in Almaty. And thank you very much to our interpreters for the great work they have done today. All the best. Goodbye.